There's something to be said about playing above yourself and taking advantage of an opportunity. And when I think about the Washington Redskins in their 2015 season, I frankly think about both of those things. I think about a team that really, in all honesty, wasn't all that particularly good, yet played above themselves and ended up taking advantage of an opportunity, that opportunity being the doo-doo-ness of the NFC East. So, for a team that many people were picking to finish butt naked last in that division, and there was all types of doom and gloom, and people are like me are talking about Jay Gruden being an idiot and everything else. The Washington Redskins sat there and played above themselves and took advantage of a good opportunity. They finished 9-7, ended up winning the NFC East. And at the end of the day, a division win equals a playoff appearance, and for the Washington Redskins as an organization, surely I have to be very pleased about this, considering the way things looked at the beginning portion of the season. And, if you looked at the team on paper, which sometimes that's worth what it's worth. Unfortunately for them, they hosted a home playoff game, but they kind of got beaten in the second half by Green Bay. They lost 35-18, so their season's over. They've got the 21st overall pick in the 2016 NFL Draft. But there was progress for the Redskins organization this year. And if anything else, it brings some continuity, knowing that they made the playoffs. Jay Gruden's not going anywhere, at least for the time being. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing long term has yet to be determined. But for an organization that's notorious, just like we talked about with the Cleveland Skid Marks and a couple of others, for going through coaches every 2 or 3 years, the Redskins are another one of those teams. Well, now you get a chance at a little bit more continuity. And again, like I said, there are certain areas of this roster, certain areas where you could see some progress, you could see some growth, you could see some progression, and even more so in the future going forward, potential. So if you're a Redskins fan, you got to be pleasantly surprised about the season. You were never expecting Super Bowl. You probably, in some ways, were just hoping that they didn't embarrass you. And they didn't. Like I said, in terms of what went well, a lot went well. They took advantage of a good opportunity, played above themselves, and finished 9-7, won the NFC East. Hey, you can sit there and talk shit about this, that, and everything else, but they won a division and they had a winning record. So this wasn't a 7-9 division champion. This wasn't an 8-8 division champion. This was a 9-7 team that at the closing part of the season was playing some really, really good football. So they earned their keep and they earned their spot in the playoffs. And part of that was due surely to Kirk Cousins, who had a really good 2015. You could see where the certainty of keeping his role, the certainty of knowing that there wasn't going to be the quick hook behind him. He was going to get a chance to be able to grow and develop. He could go out there, make some mistakes. I think that really helped Kirk Cousins in 2015, whereas opposed to 2014, you're looking over your shoulder. You're wondering if I make this throw and it doesn't go well, am I going to get benched? That's not really a way to go as a starting quarterback, especially a young quarterback trying to figure out his way in the league. And sometimes, frankly, it takes guys a while to figure it out. Different guys have different growth curves, and Kirk Cousins seemed to grow quite a bit. I mean, he wasn't spectacular, I don't think, in 2015. This is sometimes where we have to separate the fantasy stats from the reality, but he was good enough for them to get to where they got. I mean, he did throw for over 4,000 yards, 29 touchdown passes, only 11 interceptions. He's not a great threat to stretch the field vertically, I don't think. And he has a tendency to be kind of conservative in the decisions that he makes. At least he was this year, which was a good thing, again, because he didn't put his team at risk on a consistent basis with a lot of bad decisions and a lot of really horrible throws. So, again, that's progress. It's something to build on for the future for this Redskins organization. You got to look at Jordan Reed, going back. This is a guy coming out of Florida that you always thought had that athletic potential to be a difference maker. But the key thing was staying healthy. Well, Reed, for the most part, stayed healthy and had a really, really productive 2015. 87 catches, 952 yards, 11 touchdowns. He had a Pro Bowl caliber season as a tight end, and he was a guy that played really, really well in the closing stretch of the year, putting up some big numbers in some big spots. I mean, there were times where Jordan Reed just looked completely unguardable. He absolutely did. And then you also got to look at the fact, too, this was a team that went 4-2 in the division. You would say that as bad as that division was, they should have done better, but they did good enough. Had a winning record in the division. That was enough to get it done. And again, I referenced earlier that great closing stretch of the year. The last 4 weeks of the season, weeks 14 through 17, they went 4-0. They won the games that they needed to when they needed to win them. So they went from being 5-7 to 9-7. They handled their business. They controlled their own destiny. And you look in terms of the future for this organization, this 2015 draft class was pretty good. Brandon Scherf, their first-round pick at right guard, he definitely made an impact on that offensive line. Preston Smith, their second-round pick out of Mississippi State, I quite wondered whether or not he was going to be a really natural fit for their 3-4 defense. But, man, he played really, really well, especially in the closing stretch of the season, I thought. Third-round pick Matt Jones has probably made Alfred Morris disposable. Jamison Crowder, their fourth-round pick, had some nice moments. This was a good, solid draft class for the Washington Redskins. And after several years of being devoid of so many picks because of the RG3 trade, it was really important for that team to deliver in this past season's draft. And they did. And that bodes well for the future. Now, in terms of things that didn't go well for them, defensively, this was not a very good team. The ironic thing is statistically, they started off the year very, very good against the run. And then that quickly went by the wayside. They finished 26th in the league against the run. They were 25th in the league against the pass. They just weren't a very, very good defensive team. And you saw that with Green Bay putting up the number of points they did on them. That was not exactly the same Green Bay Packers explosive offense under Aaron Rodgers we've seen in previous years. You had 3 Redskins losses by 14-plus points. For a team that did go 9-7, you don't want to see that many games that they really, frankly, got kind of housed or dominated. But then you look at it even more so, and I don't know at the end of the day if this would have made that much of a difference because they already were the 4 seed in the playoffs on the NFC side. So if they would have finished with a little bit of a better record, they maybe would have been the 3 seed, maybe even. Then they would have gotten Seattle. Would the result really been any different? Probably not. But you got losses to Miami in the mix and the Giants in the mix and Dallas in the mix. You can't lose those games. Those are inferior teams. You got to find a way to win those games. And if you win even 2 of those 3 games, you're talking about an 11-5 Redskins team. 11-5. They won all 3 of those. You're talking about a 12-4 Redskins team. My goodness, the narrative changes about them significantly. But again, all in all, positive season for the Washington Redskins. So what's next? Where do they go? In terms of organizational priorities, once and for all, you close the book on RG3. Just, I'm sure they're just going to end up releasing them, and that's what needs to happen. Just the sooner the organization closes the book on that chapter of their history, the better off it is for all parties involved. Cut your losses. And laugh about the fact that while the St. Louis Rams got all those draft picks over a 3-year stretch from that deal, you've made the playoffs twice, once with RG3 as a rookie in 2012 and in 2015 with Kirk Cousins, and the St. Louis Rams haven't had a winning record in those 4 seasons. So it is what it is. And then you got to look at, in terms of the roster, you got to figure out what you're going to do with Kirk Cousins. I think it's time you re-sign Jordan Reed. You're 3 years in. You've got the ability to negotiate with him a long-term deal. I think now's the time to do it. Even with some of the injury risk, that upside, you saw it this year, what he could be and how important he could be to that offense going forward. He's going to be the number 1 option in that passing game in the future. So you've got to keep him in. Better to do it sooner rather than later in terms of a big money deal. Because if he puts up another big monster year and heads into unrestricted free agency, you're talking about putting a franchise tag potentially on him and really having to give him a lot of guaranteed money, where if he can get it done a year earlier, maybe you don't have to do so. But in terms of Kirk Cousins, this is a really interesting decision for this organization because Kirk Cousins played well at times for them, but he's not great. Is he ever the guy that's really going to develop into being great? Do you want to devote $20+ million of your salary cap to a guy like Kirk Cousins? I don't know. Do you want to franchise him for a year and see what happens? Do you run the risk of alienating him or pissing him off by franchising him? Do you want to get him done now to a long-term deal and avoid the risk of, if he had another big year under the franchise tag, he could get even more money in unrestricted free agency? It's a big decision for this organization. I think everybody assumes, and probably rightfully so, that Kirk Cousins will remain the Washington Redskins starter for at least 2016 and probably beyond. But how they go about this and what they do and what type of figures and terms they give to Kirk Cousins is going to be very important for this organization going forward. And then they're going to have to repeat some of the success that they had in the 2015 NFL draft and the 2016 NFL draft. They're not picking incredibly high, but again, that shouldn't automatically be an excuse to sit there and not have a good, productive draft, because they are in a position where they can still do that. In terms of their needs, I look largely on the defensive side of the ball. Now, I will throw out there that I think a big number one type of wide receiver on the outside is a bigger need than a lot of people give it credit for. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like a Laquan Treadwell dropped all the way to 21, or if in round 2 somebody like a Tyler Boyd or a Josh Doxson was there, that they took one of those guys, or if they fell in love with Michael Thomas's athletic upside or Braxton Miller's athletic upside, that they took them there. I mean, that's a possibility. I think wide receiver is in play for the Washington Redskins in the first round, especially if you're going to invest big money into Kirk Cousins. You know, the cap situation you'll have with Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon going forward. Yeah, wide receiver is a very feasible option, but the lion's share of this draft I expect to be devoted to the defensive side of the ball, which is a good thing for this team because the talent in this draft is more on the defensive side of the ball anyways. I think their single biggest need is that inside linebacker. You're pretty good at the edge rushers. You've got Kerrigan, you've got Murphy, you've got Preston Smith. You've got a nice rotation of edge rushers there that a lot of teams running the 3-4 would frankly love to have. But at inside linebacker, pretty much no 3-4 team would want to have their inside linebackers. Not good. Not good, which negatively impacts this team both in the running game and the passing game. And I think it's a big reason why they finished 26th in the league against the run and 25th in the league against the pass. They got to get better at the inside linebacker position. I wouldn't be surprised if they invest a very, very high pick on it. It's a day 2 pick for sure, and it might even be the first round pick, but they just got to hope that somebody falls to them at 21, and we'll see whether or not that happens or not. They might need to go up and get a guy potentially. I think safety is another big need. Again, talking about beefing up the middle of that defense, getting better in the middle of that defense. I mean, who do they really have at safety? You know, they could use some more depth at corner. You know, it kind of looked bad for them cutting David Amerson, who went on to play a good rest of the 2015. Rashad Breeland's had some moments, but to me, again, you know, you're talking about a guy like Will Blackman played some marquee minutes, if you will, for that secondary at corner. You need help there. And they could use some young depth along that defensive line, too. You've got guys like Terrence Knighton in free agency, Jason Hatcher's in his 30s. You know, so some young depth could be explored there. But the good thing, again, about this draft is for the type of players that the Redskins would want, there's a lot of 3-4 defensive linemen that could be had all throughout this draft. So it's not saying it has to be a top priority, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they go in that direction at number 21 because, again, that talent in rounds 1, 2, 3 in particular is going to be very, very good at the positions where the Redskins are going to be looking at. The good thing for the Redskins is I think this is a good inside linebacker class. I think it's a good safety class. I think it's a pretty good, really good, actually, defensive line class, especially for 3-4 defensive linemen. The Redskins come in with some glaring needs, and the needs that they have, they've got really good talent in those areas. They're not looking for help in areas of weakness in this draft class. So that could bode well. You know, again, under a new general manager, they had a good draft in 2015. Let's see if they can repeat that success in the 2016 NFL draft.